It's great to be back here. The first time I was here was, I guess, 10 years ago. When I came here, I had my arm in a sling. And sitting right over there was Artem Troitsky, who had his foot in a cast. So there's been some improvement, but not much. At least this side, it's the same stuff all over again. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, it's all a result of shouldering the burden of office. Sorry. Anyway, 10 years ago, and unbeknownst to me, unbeknownst to other people, to me they were known, but I began to talk on music and politics and sort of social change by presenting a video of a band that, and the video only had been watched about 400 times, and this band was not known outside the Russian-speaking audience. This was Pussy Riot. Now it's known everywhere, but anyway, I showed them as an example of what music can do. And today I'm going to take this up again because of this question. I mean, did we sing our way into freedom? And my answer really is yeah, but actually no. Because music has been part of this culture for a very long time, and actually, much of what I'm going to talk about today is actually kind of a tour de table of Estonian culture and music through philosophical developments and historical developments in Europe. So let me begin with the first slide, which you can put up now and later on in between some songs. Where's the first slide? The map. God. Okay. We are Finno-Ugrics. And as you can see, we don't really, these are the people who speak this funny language, which is called Finno-Ugric, the language group is Finno-Ugric. And it includes...
Please take the microphone while you're there. So we have digitally people watching this.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know, is it on? Can you hear me? Yes. I mean, obviously it includes the Estonians, but it also includes the Livonians, the Finns. How many Finns do we have here? Wow, this is all you guys. Okay. The Finns. Up here we have the Sami people. Here we have the Karelians, Karjalaiset. We have the Veps and the Ingrians and the Votes. And we all have a fairly similar language. It has nothing to do, when you say, well, is it like Russian? No, it is not like Russian. It is not like Latvian, which people speak down here. It is not like any other group. Distantly, about 5,000 years ago, we were kind of related to the Hungarians, but that was a long time ago. And so all these people speak a very similar language, and it is not like any Indo-European language. So from not Spanish, not French, not German, not Italian, none of the Slavic languages, we are completely unique. And which is illustrated also by the fact that no one really speaks our languages, and they usually say, oh, they're so difficult because you have 14 cases. To which I always say, well, we have 14 cases, but those are just postpositions, because in English you have by, with, from, in, or on. We just put the by, with, from, in, or on at the end of the word instead of the beginning. So it's not really that bad, but anyway, people say it. But there's one thing that is important to note about our languages, is that it is a trochaic language. Now, if any of you have ever studied poesy or the rules of poetry, you know that a trochaic foot is where the stress is on the first syllable. And all Finno-Ugric languages always have the stress on the first syllable. And then we end up with a verse form that in English is called Kalevala verse, after the great Finnish epic Kalevala, which was kind of composed based on real materials by Elias Londerot in the 1830s in Finland, copied shortly thereafter by the Estonian compiler Friedrich Reinhold Kreutzwald, who was inspired by this idea. But this is not only like Estonian and Finnish. There's a whole, this grew up in a period I will talk about a little later on about, but it is, the Kalevala came out and everyone all over the world, at least in the European, American space, was inspired by this because this was the poetry of the people. Der Stimme der Völker, as Johann Gottfried Herder called it, but we'll get to him too. In any case, our Kalevala verse is written in trochaic feet, and it has 4 feet, or 8 syllables, because the trochee is 2 syllables. And when I say it inspired, there was this whole period of Romanticism in the early 19th centuries. The Italians discovered their pseudo-epic because they didn't discover it. Orlando Furioso. In the United States, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote the worst poem in English called Hiawatha. And it is based just because, see, English, trochaic verse does not work in English. It is incredibly boring and dull. Most English poetry, and if you know Shakespeare, you know, it's kind of, the accent is always on the last syllable. And you know, if you want to write bad poetry, you have what is sexistically called a female ending, because the stress is not on the last syllable. But Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote the Epic of Hiawatha. Has anyone heard of it here? It is the worst, because it's written in trochaic tetrameter, because he wanted to be like, write something in Kalevala verse, which doesn't work in English. So it's like, by the shores of the Gitche Gumi, and on and on and on. And it's about some Native American named Hiawatha who shoots his arrow in the sky or something, but anyway. It's a long poem, so but we have nothing to do with, for example, the Balts who live here. So that's nothing to do with the Balts. They are completely different. We love them, but we've only influenced each other a little bit in this culture. First of all, they do not have the Kalevala verse, or as we call it, the Regi verse, because they do have actually a trochaic language, because they are actually, see these Livonians down here, one of my friends said, well, Latvians are Lithuanianized Livonians. I didn't say it. I was quoting someone who said that. But no, I mean, here, just to praise the Latvians, I mean, they're far more civilized than us, because basically when it comes to our languages, all the words that have to do with agriculture, oats, barley, plow, scythe, sickle, all these things come into our language from Latvian. Whereas we, as hunter-gatherers and seafarers, I mean, imagine these sort of agricultural people come to migrate up here, and they run into the Livonians or Leaves, and they run into the Estonians, and then they see these things they've never seen before because they come from inland, and they say, what's that? And we say, that's a sea. And what's that? That's a boat, which, for example, what we call a live is a laiva in Latvian. And we and the Finns and everyone else over there calls a forest a mets, and in Latvian it's a mez, as in measure parks, right? Is there a Latvian here? Yes? Oh, good. I have a native speaker here, right? And then you get words like the word for mushroom, which is sen or sene in our Finno-Ugric languages, but they didn't know what those were either. And all kind of fish names like sieg, sika, they all come from us. So basically, the Latvians are farmers. We were hunters, gatherers, much more primitive. So anyway, just to say. So that is already a difference, and it's something. And this culture of ours here has been built up on song. Latvians too, because they have their dainas. But I mean, I'm not Latvian, so I'm going to talk about Estonian songs. And we keep singing We're always singing. So the singing revolution, which I'll eventually get to, is really a much later phenomenon. In fact, the first words written in Estonian, first words ever written in Estonian are from the Livonian Chronicle of Henry from about 1208, and the words that this guy wrote up in 1229 was "Laula laula papi," which means "sing sing priest," which Estonians said to two missionaries who they were boiling in a pot on the island of Sodom. I'm not kidding you. I mean, really, you go read. You know, it is the Heinrich Chronicon Livonia of 1229, but he writes about the history of this period from 1180 to 1227. Now, this is what happened to us. Like, we were all these guys hanging out here in the woods, and then suddenly we were invaded by the Germans, more precisely, the Saxons. Now, we make a big deal out of this. It's like, oh my God, these terrible people came, and that's our history. Forgetting that, in fact, while the Germans came around 1180 to 1200, and invaded us and enserfed us and made us slaves in a sense. In 1188, they also invaded Ireland. Any Irish here? Yeah, 1188. And we call the Germans Saksalased. If you read your James Joyce, at least, or something else, you know that in Ireland, you call them the Sassenach, which they apply also to the Anglo-Saxons. And there's actually, if you're really interested, there's a wonderful book, which is about 35 years old, but it's called The Making of Europe, Conquest, Colonization, and Cultural Change by a fellow named Robert Bartlett. It's actually not 35, it's 25. It came out in 1994. But it's basically about how holy wars, crusades, and jihads were all part of the same thing. Because basically there was this odd change where the Pope said, go out and conquer areas. So it wasn't just, when you say crusade, it wasn't just the Holy Lands, it was also the Reconquista, or the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula. And even though the Irish had already been Christianized since like 500 and St. Patrick driving out the snakes, right, am I right here? Yeah. They still had to be re-Christianized by the Pope, and so they were invaded by the Sassanach. And of course, we were all these peasants, or not, we weren't even peasants, we were hunters and gatherers, and so we were civilized too. And the Reconquista actually was the last end in 1492, exactly the same with the fall of Granada, which was the same year that Columbus discovered the New World. So you can see the certain continuation. Now, what they established here was feudalism, and we were serfs. And of course, economists make a sort of distinguish between slavery and serfdom. But if you're on the, I don't know what you'd call it, the user end of these things, or the supply side, that's like, it doesn't really make a difference whether you're a serf or a slave from our point of view, because that's what we were, right? And so this place was from that time on ruled by a German upper class. The political situation here changed from time to time. I mean, we had the Danes politically running us. We had the Swedes, we had the Poles, we had the Russians, but we always had the German overlords that ran the country and which influenced us so much. And, but we were basically chattel property. I mean, no different from cattle. The last sale of a serf splitting up a family was in 1802 in Tartu. So it was around for a while. It wasn't very nice. And we lived that way. It was actually getting a little bit better under the Swedish rule because they were a little more enlightened and they started things such as education for Estonians. But then the Swedish adventurer, King Carl XII, had to go lose a battle in Poltava, in what is today Moldova. And since the Swedes owned this, then part of like the deal was to give it to the Russians. And they did it just, 300 years ago, just 3 weeks ago. On the day that the Russians started their huge military operation called Zapad, meaning West, in which they practice invading us again. It's, you might get rusty, right? No, it's not meant to be funny. Actually, on average, we've been invaded twice a century. This is why we store copies of all of our data in Luxembourg also. I'm not kidding about that either. You think this is funny. It's not. We actually have all critical national data in a server in Luxembourg, which we have designated according to the Vienna, whatever it is, Treaty Convention on extraterritoriality of diplomatic, of any kind of embassy. So they can't go on our property, but our property is a server. But we do keep all our data there because basically, twice a century is not a great record. And last century it was 6 times that we were invaded. So, they keep coming back and forth. So this is where we are, right? Now, culturally, we didn't have much to do except sing. No, what do you have? You don't have theaters, you don't have concerts. If you're the upper class, you obviously have concerts and people, quartets, and later on you have like Schumann's songs, Schumann Lieder being sung. But we didn't really have much, and so if you're really bored, what do you do at night? You sing songs. And what's interesting also about Estonian music is that largely the songs were sung by women, not by men. We have very few men's songs from that whole bad period. Which is carried on today in that almost all of our great poets are women. I'm not going to go start naming them all, but the point is that, you say good Estonian poet, odds are you're going to come up with a name that's not a man. Men just aren't that good at that part. So this is where we were. Women sing. This was reflected in our folk songs, which had been around, which are in Kalevala verse. And we will hear a little bit about that. I'll give you an example of one. I'll give you 2 snippets of the same song. As in, what is it? Röntykä. Now this is actually a Karelian song. No, it's an Ingrian song. Algusest peale. From the beginning. Okay, we'll start from the very beginning. And you'll hear this is a woman singing, and then the refrain comes from, well, the women in this case. But anyway, this is just a concert from a few years ago. It's a very famous thing. It's written by an Estonian. The words are from the Kalevala, but the music he wrote by a great choral composer, Veljo Tormis, and what can I say? It's just a woman singing, and you can hear this is what Regi Vers sounds like. Always accent on the first syllable, always 8 syllables, always repeated, often or usually with the repetition is in chorus form. And if anyone knows, if you speak Finnish, you more or less understand this, because Ingrian is much closer to Finnish than it is to Estonian, as a maintained vowel harmony, which we have not, because we have the wrong Estonian here. It's actually really cool music. Okay. We can leave it there. I don't want to take up all your time with this. But, I mean, this is kind of a musical form that we have in many, I mean, we have both used old forms, old melodies, but we also have new composers. And this is from actually a big series. I would highly advise buying this if you have any interest in it. It's called The Songs of Forgotten People, which is a key to understanding our singing revolution later on, because this was written in the 1970s and 80s, and the title of this is Songs of Forgotten Peoples. And these are all the people who are dying out under Soviet rule. I mean, there are no Finnish songs there, but you have Karelian songs and Vepsian songs and Ingrian and Vodic and Livonian and Estonian. Because that was the big existential fear of Estonians until we became independent again. That we're going to lose our language, we will be absorbed. I mean, it's happened basically to the Livonians, because I said they were, you know, Lithuanianized. I mean, Latvians are Lithuanianized Livonians. But, I mean, the point is that, you know, if you meet a tall person in Latvia, their odds are they are Livonian. I'm pretty tall. I mean, I'm 1.86 m, but I went to the Livonian Cultural Center, and it was the first time since I was about 13 that everyone was taller than I am. Because I'm looking around going, where is this? Anyway, so this is part of our existential angst, which we have to often deal with in this country. Now, this is not the choir music of the. It is choir music. It is not the choir music or the choir music tradition that came out of. Oh shit! It's getting late. I'm going to run out of this time. That came out of that I talked about. Now. Meanwhile, I have to look at the rest of Europe, because this becomes crucial for understanding how all this develops. Which is, all right, well, this is very short, kratki kurs if you speak Russian. You know, first we had, finally, you know, Europe re-wakes down in, you know, in Italy, in the city-states. You have something called the Renaissance. They discover the classical period. They discover classical philosophy, all of which has been out for like, whatever, 800 years, and suddenly they go, oh wow, all this smart stuff was written. And so this, which slowly made its way down from Italy up to the rest of Europe. This sort of, the understanding Greek and Roman philosophers, especially notable is De Rerum Natura by, what's his name? I'm tired. I slept 3 hours last night. Anyway, De Rerum Natura. This leads to people started thinking about science, and you get, you know, Galileo Galilei positing the heliocentric universe, and, you know, the Pope threatening to torture him to death, says, yeah, I recant, I didn't say it, but he still says, yet it moves still. You didn't buy it. That was 1632, you know, a little a skip ahead, another 30 years, you have Newton inventing or coming up with his theory of gravity or gravitational theory. And so science started moving quickly. Not here, but down there. And then, because science was already, it was making inroads, math and physics, people started saying, well, what about, let's apply this to human beings too. Which led to something we all know as the Enlightenment, in which people started saying, well, I mean, why do we have this divine right of kings? Why are you a king? Just because God made you king? And it was like, what's God, you know? I mean, so then you ended up with this theory of human beings. Picking up from Protagoras' man is the measure of all things rather than, you know, God and all this other stuff, we end up with a point of view, mainly in Scotland and France, that truth was not what God said it was, or what the church said it was, or what the Pope said it was, what is empirically visible, or you can see it, you know, sort of, which worked until deep fakes. But you can believe it if you can see it, and that if you can measure it, if you can derive it logically, as Newton did, also Leibniz in Germany, which led to kind of this thinking in, you know, among philosophers like John Locke and Voltaire and Diderot, that, well, people maybe are equal. And maybe people, you know, kings are not special. And maybe if they're not special, then why the hell are they ruling us? And maybe we should have something called democracy, which had been a word ever since about 450 BC with the Greeks, and then it started coming back. And so this became this dominant Anglo-Franco-French idea, or Scottish idea, first applied, oddly enough, by the people who read this stuff, which were the Americans and Thomas Jefferson, who then said, let's have a Declaration of Independence, and you know, that all men are created equal. No one ever said that before, in politics at least. And that's how you got the Americans. Now, the French took this up in a big way, in a good and bad way. I mean, the French mainly, I mean, you can say Voltaire and Diderot, Voltaire and Diderot, the encyclopedists, who wanted to capture all knowledge in the great encyclopedia. They're looking around saying, well, this is, you know, we're living in darkness. We have these priests telling us what's true and what's not true, yet, you know, that's what they're saying is nonsense. And actually, then they did this thing, they had this idea to show how bad all of this despotic priestly rule was, but you couldn't write about it in France because you get your head cut off in a guillotine. Well, they didn't have guillotines. That was a later invention. But in any case, so what they did was they started collecting travel logs of people who went to Eastern Europe. And of course, the travel logs of life in Eastern Europe were pretty bleak. And, you know, and this is the beginning of this Edward Said type Orientalist view of Eastern Europe as a dark, backward place. Today, it's not dark, it's more gray people living in gray apartment blocks, gray lives, and it's why 30 years after our independence, you still say, in the former Soviet Republic of Estonia, which, I mean, give me a break. 1975, 30 years after World War II, I was already a student in college. I never saw anyone write about the former Nazi state of Germany. You know, I mean, it just didn't happen, right? Germany was just Germany, right? Well, you know, on the occasion of the 30th anniversary, especially in Deutschland, where's the German report? There it is. It's always the ehemalige Sowjetrepublik Estland. Like, wait a minute, it's 30 years. Folks, stop. And we're far more advanced than Germany when it comes to anything digital. Anything digital. So anyway, all right, so this was like the Enlightenment idea. This was not appealing to everyone. Least of all did it appeal to a German pastor in Riga, because by that time we'd all been Lutheranized. Well, not the Lithuanians, but we'd been Lutheranized as a result of the Reformation. We didn't have much to say about it, but you know, our German overlord said, okay, now you're Lutheran, we are Lutheran. The good thing about this was you all learned to read, which is the great advantage of Lutheranism over other forms of religion, which is that in order to be a member of the church, you had to be confirmed. We call that lehr in Estonian, which comes from the German, which means to learn and read. But anyway, so we all know how to read, and we had except for one group of Estonians, the people here in Setomaa, which were they were part of the Russian Empire. They never got Lutheranized, and as a result, they had a literacy rate of 70% at the end of the 19th century in the All Russia census, whereas Estonia had a 92% literacy rate in the All Russia census of 1896. But Herder was like not a fan of the Enlightenment, and he really hated the fact that in the in the court of Frederick the Great, they all spoke French. He's saying, you should be speaking German, Christ. So Herder's hanging out in Riga, and he takes these trips, and then he's inspired by the Latvians and the Estonians, because they were saying, because he wrote a book called Stimmen der Völker in ihren Leiden. Liedern, sorry. Liedern. You can see my German is rusty. I used to live there, but, it gets old. Anyway, he wrote this book, which was like a huge, huge success. And the idea of it was that the fundamental unit of culture, of mankind, is not the individual, as in the United States and the UK and in France. And the French had the Universal Declaration of Man, droit de l'homme. This was the individual's rights. He said, look, what really defines culture, what really defines people, is the culture they belong to, and what determines their culture, their unit, is the culture that is expressed in their poetry. So, basically, Stimme der Völker is voices of the people. And he collected these Latvian and Estonian folk songs. And so what came out of that was an understanding among Germans in Germany that culture is a group. The unit of humanity is the culture, the language. And this was a big success and had a huge effect on Germany. Not all of it was so good, as you can imagine, that the rights of the group are greater than the rights of the individual. And it led to some not so nice guys like, Fichte, sort of taking this even further and talking about sort of the state is the guarantor of this culture. And that was not so good. Now, this is the context in which the Estonian culture is formed. First of all, we have all this Finno-Ugric stuff coming in, right? On the other hand, we have this German thing, and we're, smart Estonians all spoke German, and they were into this too. So what the Germans did as part of this, actually came out of Switzerland, but what Germany really took up on was something called Liedertafel, which means song table. I don't know why it's called a table, but in any case, choral groups started coming together and singing. And this was like a real big thing in the first half of the 19th century. And it was also part of this whole, we're all Germans and we all speak German and we all sing German. And so that's what we do. And the Estonians said, that's not a bad idea. We sing better anyway. And so 1864, the first all-German song festival took place. 5 years later, the first Estonian song festival took place, right? We copied this stuff, right? We're unabashed in this regard. And so the thing with Liedertafel in Germany is that it kind of died out. It's just like, okay, that was nice, 1864, but, new things came along. Schumann, Schubert, it's all much more interesting than Liedertafel. We, of course, kept singing Liedertafel. We sing it to this day. The All Estonia Song Festival we have every 5 years is a direct descendant of the first Estonian Song Festival of 1869, which is just basically a copy of the 1865 Song Festival. It's 1864, whatever. So in the meantime, what happens here, and didn't happen so much in Germany, is that it became slowly politicized. Because first of all, the first political thing is that Estonia, what we know as Estonia today, was actually cut in half, right down this diagonal. In the south, we had Livland, which also included, there were 3 provinces. There was Estland up here, Livland here, and we had Kurland here. And so, and we said, screw those administrative units. Everyone who speaks Estonian is part of this one culture, and that's what we're going to sing, and we're not going to define ourselves by the administrative borders of the Russian Empire. So, you can see this, there was this constant tension between this people saying, we are Estonians, and we have one culture, and we're like part of this whole tradition that was invented by Herder. And then there were other people saying, no, 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 we are liberals. I mean, we believe in the rights of the individual human being. I mean, if you look, in fact, at the Estonian Declaration of Independence, it is much more influenced by the liberal tradition, Anglo-Franco liberal tradition. Kas kellelgi on salvrätt? Ma käisin kiiresti siin. That was in opposition to this. And of course, all of the cultural national stuff was kicked into especially high gear with Woodrow Wilson coming out with his 14 points at the end of World War I, talking about the self-determination of nations, which led to the independence of every country from Finland down to Turkey, basically, almost every country. Right, so Hungarians, all these people suddenly became independent. Czechoslovakia, Poland, I mean, we all self-determined ourselves. So there was this constant pull. But what remained the same throughout this period was the Song Festival. And that is what we have, which brought us to our current position. Now, the thing about the Song Festival is that it's always been political. But so is all of our music, has been political. The first political step was actually having a song festival in 1869, saying, we are Estonians and we don't really care about your borders. And then we had various people sort of thinking about things like independence. What we have seen, especially under the Soviet period, because as I mentioned, that song cycle called the Songs of Forgotten People, we all started to feel oppressed because our language that, we've been here like 3,000 years, learning words from Latvian and giving Latvians some of our words, but we've been around for a long time, but we were being squeezed out. And as happens with the Livonians and has happened with the Ingrians, there were 200,000 Ingrians around the Petersburg area, 200,000 in 1918. There are, most optimistically, 8,000, and Ingrian speakers probably around 800. So this is, it really does happen. Cultures get snuffed out. And this is what was our great existential angst. So we started, and what do we have? If you're being politically oppressed, it's hard to say stuff because you get arrested, like in Russia today. You say the wrong thing and you go to jail. But you can sing, and you can sing folk songs. And you can combine old traditional forms with new forms. So, for example, kui te saate mängida Jaanikest, this is an Estonian band that actually has 100-year-old recordings of Estonian Kalevala verse. This is a band called Trat Attack. But you'll hear the old recording come in and out. Hear the initial old stuff, but it'll come back. Kas te panite algusest peale? Because you can hear the old recording from like 1920. võite lasta umbes minut ette edasi. This kind of turns into a Bo Diddley kind of song in a minute. Okay, we missed someone, but anyway, okay. Another example of taking old forms and turning it into a new form, into Kalevala verse, is what I have here, Isamaa ilu. Kui te võite alguses peale panna Isamaa ilu. Loud, loud. That's the conductor. This is a song. Now the first part of the song is an old 19th century song, and then the other part of the song is in Kalevala verse. This is the 19th century. It's a pretty hardcore nationalist song. This is the Kalevala verse part. You hear like the lead singer and then the choir. This is pretty hardcore, you gotta admit. Now, we've got 20,000. All right, we can turn it off. So they're going like, what is going on? Now, the idea of a song festival, I remember reading really bad articles, oh, this is all nationalism. Actually, the interesting thing about the song festival is that it is both inclusive and exclusive. Sorry about that. Inclusive and exclusive. Anyone who sings in Estonian, and sings well enough to be, you have to audition for these things, can be at the song festival. So we have like Japanese choirs coming and singing in the song festival. On the other hand, if you can't sing in Estonian, you're not there. It just doesn't make any point. So as I said, it is not look at things by nationality or ethnicity, but it does go to language, which is really the core obsession that we have here because, we only got 1 million speakers, so. Now, and then there are other forms as well of protest. You can put, I'll show you 2 versions of how something taken straight out of the Kalevala from Finland was some pretty wild sort of Karl Orff-like music. Kas te võite panna Rauaneed peale, aga enne see, mis on see viisakam versioon, pärast paneme siis metsatõlluga ka. Now this is a curse. It is a curse. It is a literal curse. It's called The Curse of Iron. My friend conducted this in 1984 in Scarlatti's church, and the Italians all walked out because they understood it was really pagan. I mean, it's as schematic as you can get, right? So if you're finished, you know the Kalevala. There are about 17,000 versions of this on YouTube if you want. Aga nüüd paneme selle metsatõlle versiooni ka. Now that was the best choir in Estonia, if not anywhere, because if you first of all sing a lot, and secondly, you're like the only country. I mean, after the death of Kotai, the only real composers of choral music are Estonian. But I'll show you a different version of how this can be. This is in the ruins of St. Brigitta's church. So this is the National Men's Choir, and that was the composer, and this is Metsatöll, which is like the heavy metal band that's playing. There's the composer. You kind of get the idea. So, but the point of this, however, is that music is something that, you do not have these generational boundaries here. It is something that it is for the culture, whether it's, the earlier version of these things that are in you see classical forms, together with folk forms coming out of, I have to finish, sorry. All right, I won't conclude then too much, I'll just say. But it makes for a unitary culture that has both young people and old people sort of participate in this. And how we got here through the various little winding paths that I mentioned is how a small little culture on the coast of the Baltic Sea has managed to survive through all this time because we do it through language and music that other people don't understand. But if you do understand and you participate, you're open to do so. So it's a very open approach, but you have to know the language. And so when you say, did we sing ourselves free? Yeah, we did. We had, 300,000 people out there singing. On the other hand, it isn't like it was sprung out of like Athena out of the head of Zeus. This has been part of our culture for all this time, beginning with the women singing their Kalevala verse, on through the adaptation of this to German Liedertafel, which then disappears in Germany, but keeps going here, on. And we still do it, and we still sing, and that's just who we are. We're just the singing people, the happy singing people. Latvians are too, by the way. Where to go? So I'm not to feel, they have kind of a similar story as we do, but anyway, that's our story, and that's how we sang ourselves free, by being free always in music. Thank you very much.